Hello there, everyone, and welcome to Explain Apologetics. I'm just checking to find out that if we are really alive. Let's just give me 1 second to verify that. Okay, I believe we are live. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your support, and thank you for those of you who have been waiting in the live chat even before we started. I've decided. By the way, there's some noise in the background. Uh, all right.
What do you hear in the background?
I hear people talking. All right.
Oh,
So if you can,
yeah. Let me
you can just maybe
just.
mute it first or something. That'll work. All right. So sorry about that, guys. And yeah, I'm glad to be back again. Just so soon. We just finished the debates last night, this morning between Dr. James White and Dr. Jeff Riddle. Exciting debates. Last night was on the longer ending of Mark, debating the Texas receptors and the critical text position. And this morning, we were back at it again with Dr. White and Dr. Riddle debating Ephesians 3:9. And we just concluded both those debates. I barely had time to have a little bit of sleep in the afternoon, but we felt we needed to review this because particularly the interest it had and the build up to it, it's like I mentioned in the debate, it took months, at least 2 to 3 months to set up this whole thing. There was a lot of compromise going out, and also, building up to this, there were a lot of feedback that was being there. A lot of things were going on in the background. It's only fair that we actually draw the threads together, and just to give you what we think would be a summary or a review of how the debate went. And joining me to do that, we'll be having Jonathan Sheffield first up. And hi, John, and pleasure to have you back on the channel again. Okay.
Sorry, I just had to unmute my mic. Thank you for having me here, Sam. It's definitely a pleasure to work with your ministry, all the great things your channel has been doing, and then also get to sit down with not only my friend Dr. Stephen Boyce, but another fellow Christian to discuss these differences we have on the text of Scripture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I realized that you were rooting for Dr. Riddle all the way, and you did have some chat with him as well last night, didn't you?
Well, I gave him some words of encouragement before the debate. Just shared, just as a fellow Christian brother. Obviously, we represent different ecclesiastical traditions and come from different backgrounds. But as a support for, a fellow Christian and supporter, I want to give him some words of encouragement.
Thank you. Thanks. That was great. And yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about Dr. Jeff Riddle later, right after this. But I also want to invite on as well, or welcome rather, Stephen Boyce, or as his name says, City Light Church. You'd rather be named after your church, Stephen. And just before that, thank you for joining us. And it's your birthday. A very happy birthday to you as well.
Yeah, 31 never felt so old, Samuel. But I woke up with an extra pain that I didn't have the day before. And yeah, so I jumped on the quickest Zoom. I have a couple Zoom accounts I just filter through. And I just realized that the first one that was up, the last one I used was the City Light. So I guess I'm representing bigger than me tonight. So I'm okay with that.
All right. And I know that you and Dr. White were talking a lot. And you guys have been speaking a lot before this debate, and also, after the debate as well. I know that he had a shout out to you as well on your birthday as well. So,
Yeah.
So you're coming into this. You've both been communicating a lot. How is he doing after the debate?
Yeah, I mean, he's probably tired. I mean, two straight nights of 2 hours plus. I mean, he mentioned the fact that he's almost 60 years old, and he would hope the question and answer would go quicker. But yeah, I mean, it was a long process to make this debate happen that most people will never understand. The gravity and the time and the loss of sleep most of us went through to see that debate happen. But I'm glad they were able to finally have it. It worked out in the end. A lot of changes, updates, but Dr. White and I had talked about different ideas, the different passages that could have been debated. He and I ended up doing a discussion on your channel. If few weeks
Yes.
ago. But definitely share his position. For the most part, we're pretty close on our basically where we land at the end is pretty close.
Absolutely, and the debate has been it's been getting a lot of positive. The debate itself has had a lot of positive feedback so far. We've received from both debates. We've also received, for example, at least on our channel, it was a record to have about 7,500 views for that first debate in less than 24 hours. So that's a record in and of itself. Granted, we are a new and growing channel, but I do want to greet and also thank some of those who've been supporting us in the live chat. James Snap, thank you for your support. You've been supporting us, I know, from the earliest debates and giving your feedback as well. Really appreciate that, James Snap. And also Tanner Dickin, who's been on early on as well. Joe Chris, who's been, a lot of these guys have been giving their support and appreciation. So I just want to say that we appreciate you guys even before we start. At least those are the names I'm noticing right now on the live chat. So what we're going to do is we're just going to briefly run through both debates as quickly as we can, maybe under an hour, and we have a little bit of time to just take some questions if possible. So with that, let me start straight to it and go to the first debate. And both of you, feel free to jump in at any time. Let's look at the first debate. The topic was on the longer ending of Mark. General question out there. How do you think it went? And we'll go from there. Anyone?
Sure. Yeah. I actually felt like Dr. Riddle came out very strong in the debate. I think his introduction was really good as far as he composed himself. He seems to be one more that would read his lines more than actually just speak them out off of his mind. Whereas, Dr. White's more prone to run out there and he's got it all in his head and he throws it all up on the screen. But I would say that from the introduction standpoint, I thought they both came out. They both shared what their position was. If anybody was watching it that didn't know anything about the issue, I think there was enough stated in both. And that's probably the benefit of the fact that you gave them 20 minutes apiece to go out and share their position. Most introductions in some debates, 15 minutes, 10 minutes. I think 20 minutes gave them enough time to explain not only their position, but the well-roundabout way of how they got to that position. I would say they both had good introductions. I think I was more surprised that Jeff Riddle had a good introduction that he did. He seemed composed when he shared his. I think he represented, I think Dr. White did as well. What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, honestly, from both Dr. White and Dr. Riddle, I believe that they both came on pretty strong in their openings. They both raised some, very interesting questions in their openings in support of their arguments. I think they both made a very concerted attempt to focus on where the division lies on this debate when we look at the available manuscript testimony and what weight we are going to give to which particular group or set of manuscripts, and also bring in there the comments that have been made on this passage by some of the ancients, such as Jerome. So I think in the beginning, even from Dr. White's perspective, he did bring up Eusebius and Jerome. He did allude that, once again, it's sort of up to interpretation on that passage from those two fathers. But I think from Dr. Riddle's point of view too, I think he led really strong with a lot of the external evidence, definitely trying to bring the argument back as early as possible to the 2nd century with his quotations from Justin and Irenaeus, and really to focus on that and show that this passage had come down historically leading up to the 4th century, where we see in history a dispute coming up on this passage. So I think both did very well in opening up their cases for their positions. Samuel, I think you're mute.
Yeah, I just realized I muted myself there, but
Yeah,
absolutely. We do realize that, for example, that Dr. White and Dr. Riddle both have excellent opening statements. And that was actually in the the live chats, especially from what I hear. I wasn't in the live chat because I was just focusing on moderating. And some people were telling me that, you have to be focused on this one. Not that you have to be focused on everyone, but this one in particular could be, there was a lot at stake. With this one. So both of them, Dr. White and Dr. Riddle, were focused. I mean, we were, my team and I, Sarah and Marcus and myself, we came in Zoom early, and we were chatting. But as soon as Dr. Riddle and Dr. White came in, there was just a silence there. Both of them were really focused, even in the Zoom. Normally before the debate, you have a lot of chat going on before the debate, a lot of fun discussions. But no small talk before the debate. Both of them were extremely focused. If I'm not mistaken, both of them didn't speak to each other before the debate. They were just extremely focused on what was going to happen. So, which from the perspective of a moderator, it puts me a little bit on that I need to be focused too, because what I'm trying to say is that focus came out throughout the debate. Both of them were extremely focused. The introductory statements is what I'm hearing from both of you. Went really well. But the cross-examination, though, that became the big talking point of the first debate on the longer ending of Mark. How do you think that, when I'm going to start with Jonathan this time, in the cross-examination, because there's a lot of contrasting feedback in the live chat?
Yeah, here, and from my view, I think it may have went off track from focusing on some of the external evidence. I think this is where, maybe even both sides could have done better explaining, because, I kind of thought that, we have a situation here where either the passage was oppressed or suppressed from scriptures, where we could have maybe focused on a little more the reasons why the passage may have been suppressed. I know Dr. Riddle did in his opening, he obviously referred to Profer Attire, who uses this passage in making fun of Christianities. And he actually puts it in context of the church bishops that are being appointed and anointed in the church, and they should drink poison. So this was part of his opening. And I thought that would have been a really good opportunity to really focus on why the passage would have been suppressed, and even maybe speak a little bit more on reasons why we find different endings. So I was hoping from Dr. White, if maybe he could have spent a little more time explaining the mechanism of how this passage can get in to different churches over a wide geographic area in different languages, between churches that didn't agree with each other, and they basically come up with this consistent reading, as opposed to focus more on Dr. Riddle's specific methodology on how he comes to grips with his methodology. And I'll kind of just leave it from there and turn it over to Dr. Boyce.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Stephen, yeah, would you agree with Jonathan on that, or would you like to add on to it?
I agree with Jonathan in the sense that they got off the focus, but I would point to the fact that actually Dr. Riddle is the one that took it off focus. In fact, Dr. White wanted to stay on topic when it came to the citations. One of the things I appreciate Dr. White, who continued to emphasize, is that he did not have a problem with the fact that these verses were alluded to in the early church. When we talked about Irenaeus or Justin Martyr, he didn't avoid that discussion. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Dr. Riddle didn't press into that more, because Dr. White was clearly not like worried about it. And he even said, oh, there's no doubt it has early attestation to the fact that it was used even into the first century. And so at that point, and again, there's basically three positions here. And if you want to read a really good and thorough explanation of different positions, you can read Tregelles when it comes to accepting Mark, but believing it was later added. Or if you want to read a long-ending defense of modern writers, I mean, even he's probably in the chat room right now, James Snap, he will take you more in depth towards the discussions of Irenaeus and Martyr and others who did use this. So there's good long-ending arguments there. And then the short ending is obviously the one that Dr. White would defend and say it ends at verse 8. But there is no doubt that, you know, guys like Irenaeus quoted verse 19 and he called it scriptures and against heresies. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
The issue that didn't get much discussion is focusing on the fact that, okay, is this an early witness? They both agreed to that. And Jonathan just pulled something into the description. It's like, okay, so if it was added, why was it added? How did this slip through the churches? If it was taken out, why was it taken out? And when did that happen and go undetected? So the question to me is not about whether or not it's early. It's, did it get added or did it get subtracted? Now, for me as well, I would say one of the things that I think Dr. Riddle's greatest weakness is his confessional view. When it comes to a passage like the long ending of Mark, if you want to defend the long ending, you don't need the confessional view to do it. When we're talking about textual variances, the long ending of Mark has far more evidence, from the patristic writers to the manuscript data being at 99% containing it. I mean, there's numerous, but that's not the issue, is the number of manuscripts or the quotations. We're talking about the earliest witnesses of it. When it comes to having it, there are no earlier witnesses than Aleph and B that lack it. The ones that do include it, you're not going to find in the Greek manuscript tradition. You're going to have to go to the fathers like Irenaeus. So now you have to ask the question about that, because as Dr. White pointed out, there is no early papyri covering that section. So the two earliest witnesses in the Greek family that we have is looking at the description from Aleph and B. And then after that, you start seeing it come into some of the 5th and 6th century manuscripts after that. And some of the early ancient translations don't have it either. And then you have Eusebius's quote and Jerome talking about it. That's where this gets fuzzy. It's like, okay, we have a gap from the 1st century to the 3rd century in the manuscript witness. What was the likelihood of it being subtracted or added? How do we fill in the gap? Let's look at Irenaeus. Let's look at Justin Martyr. Let's look at Eusebius looking backward through those 300 years. Let's look at Jerome and how he looked at those 300 years. That's where this discussion gets interesting. And I feel like, and Jonathan, you probably agree with me, that could have been where the argument spent most of its time. And I don't blame Dr. White. I believe Dr. White wanted to have that argument there. I think it turned into more of a confessional viewpoint to the Reformation later.
Right. So, yeah, which also just want to add on another point there, and the fact that, you know, very early on we find that Dr. Riddle says that, you know, that he's a pastor, he's not a prominent debater. He has done a few debates, including debating you, Stephen. But I'm just very interested in the cross-examination, because there were a lot of issues that, for example, James Knapp in the live chat right now is just talking about, for example, the 5, you know, Dr. White mentioned there's 5 endings of Mark, and maybe I'll let any one of you want to jump in on that. You know, what were the 5, you know, because we know the 3, the one that we use now, and the longer ending, and then this one in the middle, but which almost none of the versions use. But, you know, questions like that, you know, did it come out, you know, should it have come out by Dr. Riddle? And also, we're talking about debate experience. It seems that Dr. White, you know, used those debate experience to good effect in that cross-examination. So, you know, just wondering whether his debate experience really helped him in the cross-examination, because based on some of the feedback we received, that's where Dr. White began to thrive in the cross-examination especially. Any one of you, yeah, and James especially.
I would
Stephen,
say,
yeah.
and Jonathan, you can come behind me. I would say it's not. I don't think the issue is experience. I think it's staying on subject. And this happened, and I don't mean to be biased here. This happened in the introduction when I debated Dr. Riddle on the pericope adultera in John 7:53 through 8:11. I went through an entire presentation of an introduction of data from the fathers to the manuscript evidence, and the whole entire cross-examination went into something I wrote in an article as a theory, and it ended up becoming misrepresented in the cross-examination. And we had a whole bunch of introduction that was never touched on. I feel like the same thing happened at this point. And again, I might be biased to Dr. White here, but I think it is Dr. Riddle's fault, where Dr. White gave him 20 minutes of introduction and set him up into the early stages of Martyr and Irenaeus and others, where I felt like Dr. Riddle, if he wanted to really tackle that issue, Jonathan was probably sitting on the other side of the screen like, oh, this is it. This is it. Like, go get that argument right there. And then, Jeff took it more to a confessional defense again. And he should have. If you're going to defend the long ending of Mark, you don't even need the confessional view. You just don't need it. There's so much early witness there. Jonathan, what do you think? You think I'm off?
Well, I don't want to take away from Dr. White's debate experience. It does. He is quick on his feet. Obviously, he knows the subject matter. Is it helpful? I do think it's helpful. And this is just speaking for myself personally, being in debates with those that are, can speak real well, be quick on their feet. There's times I've been in situations where, that lack of experience does show. But once again, while myself and Dr. Riddle will come to the same conclusion on this passage on the long ending of Mark. So we reach the same conclusion, but how we get there is much different. So there's a different approach that I have advocated for, what the church has historically stated. That is different than Dr. Riddle's confessional view on there. And, I think there's I think where Dr. White kind of advocated for, that the text entered in history, this is where I would agree with him. This is where, obviously the manifestation of Christ, God entered history, his text entered history. But my difference with Dr. White there is he somehow separates the apostles from their churches. And one of the things that have to be talked about is if you're trying to understand what the writings of the apostles are, then you cannot separate the apostles from their churches. And because there was a physical transfer of a physical text that came into being and was handed to those the apostles appointed and set up to carry on and preserve the text, we must deal with the fact that this scripture is in the churches. It's in the liturgies. So we're talking about the Church of Constantinople. We're talking about the Church of Antioch. We're talking about the Church of Rome. We're talking about the churches in North Africa. These are the churches that go back to the apostles, which is directly connected to their writings. We don't separate the writings. So when we talk about the means by which the text was handed down, it was the office of the bishop and the congregation to secure and preserve that text coming down. And when we see the text coming out at the end of the 4th century, when Christianity is becoming legal throughout the western and eastern part of the empire, this is the text that we see. And, once again, it's a much different argument, even though Dr. Riddle and I come to the same conclusion, there's a much different argument that's being made on the approach. And I'll
Right. And
kind of stop
oh,
there.
sorry, didn't mean to cut you off there, John.
No, I want to be mindful of time and
Yeah, sure
give
thing.
Dr. Boyce some time to speak too.
Sure thing. Yeah, and also we're talking about in the context of debate experience and the approach. It must be said, there's a lot of feedback yesterday that came in, especially after the debate. People that I knew, even until today, saying that Dr. Riddle actually swayed them, particularly on the longer ending of Mark. We're going to get to the second debate in a bit. But talking about debate experience, the time management as well, there was a big difference between Dr. White and Dr. Riddle. And I think Dr. White jokingly said that he was going to send Dr. Riddle a watch, a stopwatch. My question, I guess, any one of you can answer this. Sorry?
I don't think he was joking.
And if he's not joking, I'm going to ask Dr. White to send me one as well. It's not fair that the moderator, who have most of all will require the time, unless, of course, he feels I was doing well, time management. But that said, you're talking about managing the time, and I said that Dr. Riddle did sway a lot of people, and this based on the feedback and getting back. Do you think that made a difference, any one of you, that, for example, that Dr. White was able to keep his presentation within, and that Dr. Riddle may have had even more success in swaying people had he been able to, keep it within the time? Because that's one of the feedbacks that kept coming up about time management.
I don't know if it would have affected the outcome of swaying somebody. I don't think that would have affected one person saying, you know what, I agree with Dr. White or I agree with Dr. Riddle. Most people that watched the debate already had a position. I know that there were some fringe people that watched it, and I can't speak for how many Dr. Riddle pulled off the fence in his direction. I know of a few, specifically, even Dr. White had sent me a message of somebody who was on the fence who ended up landing on the shorter ending after the debate. So I'm sure there's people on both sides that were swayed somewhere by an argument. I don't know if the time had much to do with that.
How about yourself, Jonathan?
Yeah, and obviously I love Dr. Riddle's passion. I don't think anything can be debated about his passion for defending the Word of God. I think at times it's inspirational to see his passion and his fire for defending the Scripture as he does. From that standpoint, I think it was inspirational. I think there's a lot of fire and passion in there, and that's good. And, so when you talk about time management, that fire and that zeal he had for Scripture, obviously pushed him a little over time, but there can't be no doubt.
He's a pastor, and pastors never keep to time. So,
yes, I've been in those.
And he's a Baptist. He's a Baptist pastor on top of that.
Yeah, in the Anglican Church, we have the liturgy. So if we're not out of there by 45 minutes to an hour, there's riots. So,
but go on. Sorry, John. I didn't mean to interrupt you in the middle.
No, not at all. But time management, and once again, this goes to debate experience. Dr. Boyce has been in them. I have been in them. Dr. White has been in a number of debates, so obviously he's more accustomed to that. But I do go to Dr. Riddle's passion and fire carrying him away. So I don't think it really made a difference on the issue. I think what came down to it was each presenter's content and the argument that they made.
Absolutely. And so with that, I do want to transition into the second debate. We're going to come back and talk about specific issues in particular. This is just like an overview of both those debates. Whereas the first debate, Dr. White, seemed to be very focused on, the principle in general. In the second debate, there was a lot of feedback that said Dr. White, was just completely on top of that second debate on Ephesians 3:9. Just a bit of background for those of you watching. One of the reasons we did two debates is because Dr. Jeff Riddle wanted to do the longer ending of Mark, And for the earliest parts, at least, of the discussions that I was having with both panelists, Dr. White really didn't want to do that discussion on the longer ending of Mark. It was only later that he conceded. I said, you know what, I'll just do it. But for the most part, Dr. White, from the get-go, his focus was to do Ephesians 3:9. He just had written about it, I believe, in spoken about it on the dividing line. And so this was his passion. And did it seem occur to you that it was a very different Dr. White that showed up, very comfortable, very much at home? It just came in all cylinders firing for the second debate, especially. Not that he did bad in the first debate, but this was a very passionate Dr. White today morning.
Well, that's because, I mean, these types of issues, the TR readings, those unique readings, have been something he has spent a very, very long time. Obviously, he wrote the King James Only Controversy and spent many, many hours discussing this on his programs. In fact, when I first had the debate that Dr. Riddle and I had sent out, he posted it on his wall and asked for almost a debate on Ephesians 3:9 with Jeff Riddle back then. So this is something he's been wanting to see happen for a while, even after the text and canon thing with, Robert Truelove and Riddle. He's been asking for a long time to have the debate we saw today. And that's his bread and butter. I mean, that's where he spends a lot of his time. I'm not saying that he didn't spend time in the long ending, but
yes,
he has spent years in these textual issues of the TR where there's these unique readings. And the long ending of Mark, again, you could go a lot of different ways with the evidence. There's pretty much three fundamental positions you can land at, whether it be the short ending, long ending, a Tregelles, Gurry view. But when it comes to Ephesians 3:9, I mean, this is when a bunch of the majority text guys go, I'm out. I don't even know if, I doubt James Snap would defend Ephesians 3:9 in the TR, because there's no reason to defend it outside of a couple minute details of possibility. So I think Jeff Riddle was set up to fail by defending a passage like this, because James White has been studying this for many, many, many years, and there's not a lot of evidence you can really use to defend a passage like that. And that's just my personal opinion about how it went. I thought James White dominated the entire debate from start to finish.
You're talking about the second debate, right? And I'm just wondering if, Jonathan,
Yep.
would you agree with Stephen's assessment of that?
Well, I think Dr. White was definitely more comfortable with this passage, knowing that there's obviously much more manuscript evidence in support. So obviously, if we're looking at the previous night where Dr. White is having to defend a small kind of minority textual tradition, on the shorter ending of Mark, here was an opportunity for Dr. White to step in and really showcase, the evidence as a whole in support of Ephesians 3:9. Now, once again, I think these problematic readings, or these minority readings and traditions, that we see in Ephesians 3:9 is not really where we should be having the discussion at. I think these are a very small, in some ways, and I was kind of talking to Dr. Boyce about it before, we're arguing over a letter here. Not that saying there's anything wrong with it. I do think it is interesting on the passage. If we look at the subject as a whole, even from the TR perspective, Cardinal Jimenez, we understand the reading that he went with. And once again, Cardinal Jimenez not only had, the disposal of the Vatican, he had the Greek manuscripts that were obviously coming in from Constantinople after it was invaded by the Turks. And he had great scholars under his command that he reached this decision. And I think no one is going to doubt the scholarship and the ability of Cardinal Jimenez and the addition that he put forth. And once again, Erasmus, great scholar, really understood the ancient church, its writings. He understood its history, and he went with a different reading in there. And then we have Stephanus, who actually, has both of their readings, because he's doing an edition of, from Erasmus and Cardinal Jimenez, and he chooses fellowship. So I think it makes for a definitely interesting instruction. I think for me personally, if we are going to go with fellowship, if we're going to really defend that passage. Now, once again, it does come down to, and I understand where Dr. Riddle is coming from, because I think he offers a very Athanasian position. Should we trust the modern eclectic scholars, or should we trust the scholarship of the magisterial Reformation? So it's once again, who do we want taking that last shot? Do we want Michael Jordan, or do we want who's on their team over here today? And so I do think it's a very Athanasian defense, and we're not changing the creed. We're going to hold firm on this, and we're going to defend it. I think one of the things that I would have done in defending this passage is providing a naturalistic explanation of why the reading fellowship may have fallen out of use in the churches themselves. I think that's where a better argument may be out there to be made on there.
Well, thanks for that, Jonathan. And by the way, Stephen Boyce, James Knapp has in the live chat said that you're right in representing him earlier in what you said about him, that about Ephesians 3:9. But I did want to talk about also the and I kind of lost my train of thought there with that one. But I wanted to talk about for you mentioned, Jonathan, about the word. It was just about one word.
One letter.
One letter. My bad. One letter or one word involved in one letter in that word on the Ephesians 3:9 issue. But I guess that to Dr. White, just for those of you wondering, what's the point of debating one letter? Well, just two reasons. Number one, this was an area that not many people had done work. A lot of people had done debates on the pericope adultery, that is John chapter 7, 53 to 8:11. A lot of people have done work on the Comma Johanneum, which is the 1 John 5, 7, and the longer ending of Mark. That's something you see a lot of, but hardly anyone, I've not looked this up, but I don't think anyone has ever had a debate on Ephesians 3:9. This may be one of the first few on that. But I guess the reason, and I'm just going to put it out there and just see what Stephen thinks, but do you think the reason that Dr. White wanted to press this issue is because throughout both debates, Stephen, his focus was on the inconsistency? And that was a word that kept being repeated from the first debate onwards, where he felt that would the TR advocates, for example, be consistent and using the same methodology they would use to defend, say, the longer ending of Mark? Would they be using that to defend this? Do you think that's the reason that he was pushing that? And secondly, I just put two questions out. Do you think that's a fair way to phrase this whole critical text versus the TR position?
Well, I think it comes down to the text position, like you said, of consistency. What are we gauging this by? The evidence, the data. This is what sets somebody like Dr. Riddle apart from somebody like James Snap or Maurice Robinson of the majority text, or if we want to go farther back with Dean Burgon and Scrivener himself, who left the reading as it sits. He did not use oikonomia. He maintained what Erasmus used. So, but Scrivener himself didn't agree with a lot of the things he put in his text. So where Dr. White would have attacked this is, what consistent methodology are you using to come to the conclusion of your reading? Because over here, you're using this standard. Mm-hmm. And even Jeff Riddle said it today, the TR is an eclectic text. But really, when you get to a passage like this, any realm of eclecticism that is used in other passages is completely gone. This is why I said the majority text people, they're out on this passage. And even a TR advocate that's not considered the TR only, meaning that what's in Scrivener's text is the final everything for all of the New Testament, and those are the very jots and tittles all the way through kind of more ordeal. Like those people that just prefer a TR reading most of the time, like a Jonathan who's ecclesiastical, this is where they back up and go, we can live with Cardinal Jimenez here against Erasmus. There are TR advocate friends of mine who would never defend this passage of Scripture. And so why Dr. White would exploit something like this is his question is, and he held up the text numerous times, why should I accept this reading? Because Dr. Riddle's making a claim that God has kept his word pure through all ages, which, by the way, Dr. White believes that too. I know that people like commenting and they're like, oh, well, obviously he doesn't believe in preservation. Critical text people believe in the preservation of Scripture. We just don't believe that they meant that in the creeds the way that they're interpreting it. How could a reading like this be kept pure through all ages when it was more of a nuanced thing that came later, or spelling difference? There's a few manuscripts they talked about. I think even Dr. Riddle said it was 10th century or something like that. He misspoke. Some have labeled it 11th century. Others have labeled it 12th century. So whatever. He was a couple hundred years off or so. But again, why should we accept that reading here when you have P46, Aleph, B, C, the different unsealed manuscripts from 33, 35. I mean, why should we accept this reading against this one? So he's looking at consistency, but he's also attacking the heart of TR onlyism. And that is whatever is final in that compiled text of Scrivener is the final say-so of all readings. It doesn't matter how you got to that conclusion. It doesn't matter why you got to that conclusion. It doesn't matter if there's evidence for that conclusion. As long as it's in that text, the reformers got it right. And it blew my mind. I was so glad to hear Dr. Riddle talk about this today. The reformers got it right. So they're the authority. They're the ones that got it right because God was doing something special in that time and place that no one else was really able to experience, but that time period. And so he was able to admit that. And that's, I think, what Dr. White wanted to see happen is that this is not about the data. It never has been about the data. It's defending a presupposition. And Dr. Riddle admitted his view was a presupposition off of confessionalism. And right there, when he said that today, and I saw numerous people say this, and I was the first one to get it out there. I typed it the fastest. The debate's over. It's over because the debate is no longer about the evidence at that point. Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, once again, Dr. White is going to have his problems, with a per se confessional view. But I think it's also fair to point out on Dr. White that there's a problem with his textual approach as well. I think one of the main things, because while, Dr. White was trying to show the inconsistency between, well, look at all this evidence for the LE, you accept it, but in a case where there's hardly any evidence, you don't. Now, the reverse is true in the sense that here's a passage, the LA, it's very early attestation. It's found in the churches. It's in the majority of manuscripts. And we're talking about church manuscripts. It's showing up in the churches, and you're siding with documents sort of unknown provenance. And I think one of the approaches that, to be fair, and once again, I understand Dr. White going after the confessional view, but to be fair to say, one of the other points is, and Dr. Peter Gurry has made this point in articles that he has written on evangelical textual criticism, that James White and even Daniel Wallace, is that they exclude the vast bulk of New Testament manuscripts as irrelevant from the primary establishment for their texts. So to be fair, Dr. White's body of evidence that he uses as the basis for his decision-making for a passage like Ephesians 3:9 is basically a handful of manuscripts. The vast bulk of New Testament, or the body of manuscripts, he throws out. Now, Dr. Gurry made clear that distinction that James White excludes. And this has been my point in the past. So when you're excluding the vast majority, your decisions or your conclusions is based on a handful of manuscripts that are unknown origin. And so, which then goes to question your overall results, because you're excluding the vast because you believe that these manuscript traditions are secondary in origin. And once again, I'll be discussing that more with Dr. Ehrman. But from the standpoint of the TR looking out at Dr. White has already excluded from his analysis in making this conclusion on Ephesians 3:9 and even the long ending. He has limited his evidence to basically a handful of documents and has rejected the majority. And that's what Dr. Peter Gurry made the case is to be fair, they're not using documents that Dr. White is appealing to, he doesn't even use in his analysis. So why appeal to something you say is corrupt to use as a witness against this particular reading or 1 John 5:7? And I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Boyce.
Yes, I just wanted to ask even if you wanted to just say something on that.
Well, first of all, one real quick answer. Do you defend the reading in the TR today, or would you go with oikonomia from where Cardinal Jimenez would have landed?
We're talking about Ephesians 3:9.
Yeah. Well, on Ephesians 3:9, and once again, that is a very minority tradition within the TR. Once again, I do understand where Dr. or Cardinal Jimenez is coming from. I understand where Erasmus is coming from. Now, if I were to defend Ephesians 3:9, I would look back to the ancient church in the 2nd century and see that the fight that was happening was, the church against Marcion. And in defending that position, they promoted a strong ecclesiastical polity in their defense of the economy of the church. So if I would go with that reading, my understanding is I would have to understand how that reading transferred over. So, what was lost in translation, or was there any historical impact where that word could have gained a greater emphasis? So if I was to defend Ephesians 3:9, that would be my position. I definitely see how Ephesians 3:9 or the economy fits in with the historical church and why that reading would be used. So I definitely see where I could support Cardinal Jimenez on that reading.
Yeah, I mean, if we're based on an ecclesiastical position that you hold, that you would have to reject the reading in the Scrivener text. You would have to accept oikonomia, which would have been Cardinal Jimenez all the way through the manuscript tradition. That's the one that they used. This is clearly a spelling problem that happened in transmission much, much, much later down in history. And it's understandable. Spelling is one of the most common textual variances in the process of transmission. This one just so happened to, and there's a couple letters difference here, but this one just so happened to spell a actual word that's a different word. And therefore, there's no way to defend this reading, no matter what position you are. If you're majority text, this reading's out. If you are a ecclesiastical text position like yourself, Jonathan, going back from Cardinal Jimenez backward into how this passage was used by anybody, by Jerome, whoever, this passage is not, the Latin does not support the reading in the TR today. And this is the difference between a majority text, a TR preferred, and an ecclesiastical position text versus a TR only. Because a TR only has no other choice but to stick their neck on the line for a reading like this, when all of you, your position, majority text position, can say, I concede here. I don't need it to defend the text. If I were a Byzantine priority, or if I was a majority text, I would say, y'all have this one. Like y'all can take this argument. I'm not defending it. I don't need it for my textual position.
Yeah, but I do understand how things fall out. So, I mean, obviously, Jerome kind of tells us that like the 35th verse of 1 Corinthians 7 is not found in like Latin copies because of the difficulty of translating of those words from St. Paul into Latin. So, there are things that have occurred historically either through translation, as a result of different issues that occurred historically. I would say on Ephesians 3:9, there would be a case to be made where the historical apostolic churches did emphasize a strong economy of the church, or strong administration, where, I mean, Tertullian and Marcion, Tertullian and Irenaeus, they argue for a strong ecclesiastical polity. And then obviously we see with churchmen such as Jerome, Cardinal Jimenez, using that emphasis in the word. Now, it does fit the historical mindset of the church. I'm saying if there was anything to be made apart from the minority manuscript tradition that supports this reading, I would say there is where a case to be made. But once again, I don't think this is an issue that we should even be discussing. I think fellowship, for me, I think they basically almost mean the same thing. Go ahead, Dr. Boyce.
Yeah, if you want to say something really quick, Stephen, and then we're going to have to move on to the next topic. But
this is important to where both of them are coming from. And this came up numerous times in the comments. You would have to admit, Jonathan, that when we're talking about a majority, because Dr. White does not defend a majority text. A critical text position does not require the majority of manuscripts to be on its side to accept a reading. When you're looking at textual criticism in the sense of the eclectic text position, you're not counting, although you consider how many manuscripts may read a certain way, but comparing the long ending of Mark to a handful of manuscripts that read in Scrivener's text today, like say for Ephesians 3:9, they're not comparable. And the reason they're not comparable is because when we look at the long ending of Mark, the two earliest witnesses that carry the heaviest weight to a reading like that don't have it. So we can't treat those two manuscripts like two manuscripts on Ephesians 3:9 that are 12th and 11th century that are much, much later. They're not equal in comparison, nor is it equal to compare it in that sense, because you don't have a guy like Eusebius, who is probably one of the best church historians of the churches that were started by the apostles. And he's over there in a letter written to him about a controversy between Matthew and Mark, stating that the best manuscripts didn't have it continue after that section. So again, these are discussions that have to be heard loud and clear to say, well, you guys accept the majority of manuscripts in this passage in Ephesians, but you don't do that for Mark. I'm not saying you're saying this, but that was the argument in the comments. It's like, wait a minute, the weight of the two manuscripts that we're talking about for the Long End and Mark are the earliest citation witnesses of that passage. The ones we're talking about in Ephesians are 1,200 years after the fact, and they're in a very small segment of where you can see where it was misspelled or the wording was backed up or whatever. So I don't think those two arguments are comparable, because nobody on our position is defending the number of manuscripts.
And just to clarify,
guys, we're gonna have to move on after this, but yeah. So go ahead. Go ahead, John.
Oh no, sorry. And once again, I do want to clarify, it's the weight. We are not counting manuscripts. So when, for instance, when Dr. White appeals to an old or a Syriac manuscript as a witness against the LE, we define witnesses a little differently. In the sense that while he may give priority or weight to that witness, the churches of the Aramaic churches that are in possession of the Peshitta have that. So when we weigh it, regardless of the age of that Syriac tradition or one manuscript, we weigh the fact that, even though the Peshitta that is witnessing, and we're talking about the 4th and 5th century, those churches have standing. We know where those churches come from. What Eusebius does document is that Christianity came to Edessa very early by Thaddeus. And the documents that he does show from the office of Edessa show that the nobility supported there. So when we talk about weight, I would agree. We're not counting numbers. It's all about.
Well, and I'm talking about specifically Greek manuscripts. The earliest witnesses would be citations of the fathers like Irenaeus and Justin Martyr.
Just to clarify, because someone else asked that question as well, Stephen. The earliest witness is Justin and.
Well, we're talking about manuscripts. The discussion right now that Jonathan and I are trying to have are talking about legitimate Greek manuscripts. There are other manuscripts into when we're talking about the father citations, or whether you're talking about the Syriac or Peshitta. Now we're in now we're on a second discussion. I was strictly referring to the Greek manuscript evidence, not so much the early. I recognize there's earlier than Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, no doubt.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this was a great discussion, guys. We do have to move on due to time, but thank you guys so much. Now we're going to just go towards the end, and then we're going to open, for those of you in the live chat, we're going to open for Q&A. So if you do have questions, feel free to start writing them in. Just if you also could do what we did in the debate, just capitalize question or something, just give us an indication it's a question to be raised, and we'll try and raise them up. So with that, one of the final things I wanted to do is to bring, we spoke about, for example, the consistency issue was what Dr. White was pressing on, because our focus in this review is the debate that Dr. White had with Dr. Riddle, and the consistency issue was what Dr. White was driving both yesterday and today morning. And then you did find, I just wanted to touch on the cross-examination, because yesterday it was very cordial and I didn't have to get involved at all. Today, it was very passionate on both sides. And I remember that, for example, Dr. White was eager to answer the questions, which is good, I guess, for those watching at home. But, I just had to step in between and just say, to allow Dr. Riddle to finish the question first, because one of the things that we discussed beforehand is that the speaker whoever is cross-examining, will control the time. That's been the policy throughout. So there was one occasion, I think, when Dr. White was cross-examining Dr. Riddle, that I made the same call as well, asking Dr. White to control the time. So, but you did find that from the cross-examination, there was a lot of passion coming through, particularly which went on towards the end of that discussion, which started going into, for example, a little bit more emotional issues, which leads to my next question. There was a lot of emotions riding here. Now, some people are looking, and I remember some people asking, why is Dr. White and Dr. Riddle getting emotional? And particularly Dr. White, this meant a lot to him. For example, he was asking, why don't you say my name? And I can assure you that conversation continued even after the debate was over between Dr. White and Dr. Riddle as well. Both of them were gentlemen. Both of them were very Christian in the way they approached it. They were not shouting over one another, but it was a conversation, and it was between two brothers in Christ, just discussing that. But my next question to either one of you would be, for example, I know that there was a lot of things being thrown at Dr. White from the TR movement, and maybe there was some against Dr. Riddle as well. Was that the reason why it got emotional, or was it strictly in the debate itself? Things that brought out the passion from both speakers, particularly Dr. White.
You want me to take this first, Stephen?
Sure, go ahead.
Once again, we're talking about the Word of God here. So, passions are going to, be elevated on both sides. Once again, when the Word of God is at stake, we're going to see this. We see this between Luther and Zwingli at Marburg, and that was over, just a few words. This is what led to such a division in the Reformation, is that they were going to stand their ground on there. When we talk about the Word of God, it's it's trying to convert sinful men's hearts. But in here, I don't doubt the intentions of either presenter, Dr. White or Dr. Riddle. They're both very passionate. They're both very sincere in their convictions, and that can't be attested to. But because
Absolutely.
we're talking about such a subject as the Word of God, I believe it is important. So Dr. Riddle's passion and his fire for defending the Word of God, I think it's, very natural to get elevated and passionate in there. And after 2 straight days, this is a very real issue on both sides of the fact. Even from my side, I think it's a very real issue within the church, and it does matter. The differences between our views are huge. Now, I don't think Ephesians 3:9 and some of these other verses play in. There's a bigger issue at stake here, and that's what's boiling in everyone's hearts.
Right.
And I'll turn it over to Dr. Boyce here to get his thoughts.
Go ahead, Dr. Boyce.
I think there was 2 things that contributed. I mean, when you are up late at night debating for 2.5 hours the night before, and then you back around. I mean, I debated Leighton Flowers one night, and then the next night, Jeff Riddle. And I promise you, the second debate was more irritable than the first one, because it is exhausting to do a debate. It's energy. You got to put your energy into it. You're putting your mind into it. Your brain is functioning at a high speed, and you're just shooting stuff out and speaking and answering and listening and answering. It's an exhausting thing. And Jonathan, you know this. You've debated Carrier and Price and Dillahunty and anybody that's in any level debate, even if you're sitting
Ehrman to come. Yeah.
I mean, even if you're sitting at home, it's exhausting. So there's no doubt I would always expect the second debate to have, if there's a part 1, part 2, to have a little bit more fireworks. Another thing I think that contributed in here was Dr. Riddle continually refuses to address Dr. White. I don't know if there is some sort of, covenant made behind the scenes where he cannot call him by name. I don't know. And I think Dr. Riddle slipped up yesterday. He actually called him by his name. And actually, Dr. White pointed that out. I personally think it's disrespectful, but that's just my opinion. Nobody asked for it. But I think it's disrespectful not to address the person. My opponent, my whatever. I mean, it's one thing if you've been addressing them all along and you want to choose a different title, but even when I have debated with atheists, I know you have done this, Jonathan. You're very careful to do this, like Richard Carrier, Dr. Carrier, or Robert Price, Dr. Price, whatever the situation is. I think in the spirit of brotherhood, if we truly see each other as brothers in Christ, you know, I know that this passage isn't explicitly saying this, but it talks about greeting the saints by name. You know, the New Testament talks about that. And I think that was an agitation that built up from one debate to the other, because he addressed him in the first debate, and in the second debate, it went back to my opponent. And I do think it's disrespectful, but nobody asked my opinion, but that's mine. And I think that was the second thing that agitated.
Yeah. So, and also bear in mind, and again, I'm as a moderator, I try to be as neutral as possible throughout this whole thing. But I mean, if you look at the live chat, some of the things that happen, and I know that Slam RN was one of our team members appointed her as to be an admin or moderator in the live chat. And from what I heard, there were people that had to be blocked as well. I'm not sure who they were, but things got really, really heated in the live chat. And I think Dr. White actually knew about that. Rich Pierce, who was from the Dividing Line, was also in the live chat. And I think he was kind of like, for example, seeing that, and maybe he spoke to Dr. White, I don't know. But the point is that and I think that the attacks were coming, more of them for Dr. White than they were for Dr. Riddle. And as a moderator, as someone who is just trying to do this, I'm just wondering whether that got to him, because bear in mind, guys, Dr. White and Dr. Riddle were able to have a conversation at the end. Now, I did mention at the start, both yesterday and today, they were speaking to me before the start of the debate, but they were not speaking to each other at the start of the debate. And it was not like they were being rude to each other, to be fair. They were just extremely focused on preparing for the debate. But after today's debate, they did speak to each other, and that's where you saw them, addressing one another as brothers. And in fact, one of them even asked the other, when you go to heaven, and for example, and spoke about, meeting each other in eternity. You see that there is a mutual respect that they had for each other. It was so cordial that, not cordial, but it was, both of them were actually talking to each other as brothers, which is not reflected in the live chat, where it got really, really brutal and hard. So I guess that gets to a person sometimes, and I guess that's what I was trying to bring out. And maybe when you see the emotions riding high, those were the things that are going on in the background. And I guess it's any human being would respond in that way. Anyone? Sorry, Stephen, did you want to say something?
I would say typically what you'll find is that the two people that are having the debate get along better than the people that follow them. For example, I'm a Duke fan. And all my North Carolina fans, like Roy Williams, I'm a Mike Krzyzewski guy. They're buddies. Yeah. The fans hate each other's guts and try to turn everybody against everybody. But at the end of the day, Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski will sit down and have a beer together, and they'll sit down and talk basketball on ESPN together. They'll shake hands and hug. But if you listen to the fans, you'd think they were slitting each other's throats behind the scenes. Typically, Absolutely. What you find is people can get along better, and it's kind of part of human nature to feed the emotion and keep the hype going, because we got to defend our position. And this is why I don't debate certain people, because they don't know how to separate their emotional impulse for what they believe in, and then they start attacking the person instead of the data. There's certain people that I won't mention my name, I refuse to debate. And it's not because I'm afraid to debate them or have a conversation with them. It's they don't know how to separate their emotional impulse of attack about the person.
I was just going to ask you that, because this was one of the questions, since you mentioned that, you just made me remember one of the questions that kept coming up yesterday was whether you would debate James Knapp, and whether Dr. White would debate James Knapp. And I guess before we go into the Q&A, that'll be a good way to transition into that. Would you be willing to debate James Knapp? And also, in the previous live stream we had, someone actually had brought up that Dr. White told you not to debate James Knapp. And I know that's not the case, because I had a chat with Dr. White before you did, so I knew that, some of your thoughts even before you and Dr. White really started talking. So, but just shed some light on that, because I think that's a question that a lot of people were having in the live chat.
Yeah, Dr. White has never told me to debate or not debate anybody at any point, any time, in any conversation I've ever had with him. He's just not that type of person. I don't think he really cares. I know people like to think that there are these conversations behind the scenes, like, Stephen, don't debate somebody. Like, give me a break. Like our lives are filled with a lot of things. Dr. White's working on his projects. I'm trying to finish a dissertation, starting a church in Asheville. Like we have too much going on to get into that kind of high school drama feel. But no, there's certain people I enjoy reading, but I would not debate them or discuss with them until they learn to change their demeanor. If somebody is willing to sit down, this is why Jonathan and I can sit down and have discussions. I can talk about the data. Jonathan can talk about the data. We can spend an hour differing on the data and never one time attack the other person as a thinker or as a student or some sort of, show me this evidence, show me that evidence kind of thing about yourself and defend your position, defend your credentials. Like when you start getting into that, there's just, I don't care. Like, I just don't care anymore. There's too many other good discussions out there. It's like I told somebody in the chat today, I've got numerous debates lined up over the next little bit of time with atheists, Mormons, those, when I can get along with those guys better than some of maybe the TR people or other Christians, I'm choosing those debates every day of the week, every single day of the week. And if somebody wants to change their tone and how they attack the data and learn to separate their emotional defense of the data off of attacking their opponent, when those kind of things can happen, I'll sit down and have a discussion with anybody. I'm actually a very reasonable person, despite some of the TR rumors. They're just mad I left that movement, and I understand. So, but as a result, I can sit down with an atheist, a King James onlyist, a Mormon, agnostic. It doesn't matter. I'll sit down and have a conversation with any of them. But when it starts leaving the realm of data and we start attacking the person and then saying, oh, I'm attacking the data, I want no part of that discussion. It's a waste of time.
Right. And I do want to say this as well, because, Jonathan, I know you've debated a lot of people as well. And sometimes we get along and off screen with the people we debate with, and sometimes people don't realize that in the comment section. So I remember debating Dr. David Wood on apologetic methodology. Particularly, I was advocating for a brand of positive apologetics, which is just focused on presenting the gospel and advancing that. And I remember debating with Dr. David Wood, and both of us got. When we were talking before the debate, things were really cool and calm, and there were a lot of small talks going on between them. And even Dr. Wood was joking with me before the debate. And after the debate, I remember we had dinner together. We went in the same car, and when we were about to leave, Dr. Wood actually came over and gave me a big hug at the end of the debate. So I'm leaving thinking the debate debate really went well. Both of us, and in fact, I can tell you this, in some of my other debate, another debate I did, Dr. David Wood actually sent me a list of notes, to prepare for the debate. So we got on quite well. We disagree on methodology, but we get on quite well. We've respected each other. I certainly respect him. And what happened after that is that you find another an apologist online, who basically produced videos attacking me for being willing to challenge David Wood. And I'm here thinking, and it was brutal, by the way. I was called a false teacher. I was called a lot of things, an idiot, a fool, name it. But here's where it gets really interesting, because when the debaters are not sharing that attitude, it becomes, particularly among Christians. Now, I can understand that if non-Christians do that. I get it if non-Christians do that. If non-Christians want to attack you, that's to be expected. But when you have that within the Christian circle, that really becomes really sad, because we need to remember that what unites us, namely the name of Christ, sometimes is far greater than our minor differences. And so I just, with that, want to go into the Q&A, and want to start with Jonathan. Some of the questions that we've been having here. Right. So, first question. Let me pull up some of the questions that did come up. All right. I'm still trying to look for a question. If anyone in the live chat wants to send in a question, I'm trying to find them. My team is not here with me. After 3 debates in 2 days, they've given up. Okay. Oh yeah. James Knapp says Stephen Boyce, if the freer logion. So sorry, we're going to Uh, I'm trying to find if there's a question for Jonathan first, because Stephen was just sharing quite a bit, and just to get Jonathan involved.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Just let me pull that up again.
Sorry, Jonathan.
It's okay. There's
Oh, yeah.
no.
Yeah, the comment, what James Knapp says, Sheffield, the patristic writers use non-TR writing oodles of time. It's just a comment. You want to respond to that?
Well, yeah, they do. And I think we have to understand from a lot of patristic writers, and this is what happens in this school of thought. Now, they're making an assumption that in all cases, they are reading from the official text. Okay. So I think people need to understand is when you're starting out before you become a bishop, you don't have access specifically to the church text. We've all seen codexes before. You don't just bring that home. I think it's important that the church was in hiding for the first 300 and plus years. And like, for instance, so we have Riddle of Edessa, the bishop over the Aramaic church. What we found in his writings is he quotes from a lot of his writings on the gospel. We find he references the old Syriac, but the text that is in his church is the Peshitta. And just like myself, obviously I have my text, my private study text that I use, and then the text that is read in the church. Richard Hooker, he, even though we know what text was in his church, he very often refers to the Douay-Rheims. So this assumption that, yeah, they don't refer to the TR all the time, but you're making an assumption that every time they're quoting or paraphrasing scripture, that they're actually reading at all times from the official text. The point of Neville Birdsall's study on the text of Fotis at Constantinople is we know in the 9th century that text, or the Syrian Byzantine text form, existed at the Church of Constantinople. And here we have its patriarch, Fotis, who is not quoting from that text. Now, once again, Fotis did not start off as the patriarch of Constantinople. So I think it's very important that we understand that at all times, they are not looking in front of their text. We can't make an assumption, because we've already seen it in studies with the Bishop of Edessa, Rabola, who, even though in his church, the Peshitta is there in his writings on the gospel, it's actually reminiscent of the old Syriac. Why is that? Because you don't get to bring that text home with you. We see the same thing in Fotis, and it's the same thing we see in lots of fathers. Now, obviously, we see a difference when Chrysostom at Antioch is preaching from the text in front of everyone. What happens there? Obviously, when we talk about Gregory Nazian and the other Cappadocian fathers, the text that they're preaching on from Constantinople. But on occasion, they do refer to a mixed text or another form of the text that's not in their church. And we have to remember, we got to get out of this modern world where we get to take the text home to us. They did not have printed copies. They could not take the codex to their home. The text was being guarded. So the text that they did have available to them is not the same as the official text in the church. So I want to make that distinction, because Irenaeus and Tertullian specifically say go to the church. They don't say listen to what I have. Irenaeus could have said that very easily. They said go to the churches to see the official text. And right. So I don't, and it's a point that I've tried to make with James Knapp before, is we can't just make up assumptions that every time they're quoting scripture, however loosely, that they're in front of the official text in their church, because they can't just bring that heavy thing home.
Got it. Thanks so much, Jonathan, for that. We're going to ask, because we have less than 10 minutes for the Q&A, if we could keep the answers to about within a minute or so, that would be great. But thanks, Jonathan, for that. Dick's question, also by James Knapp for Stephen Boyce: if the Phriologion could be a different ending separate from verses 9 to 20, how exactly do you think that could or would happen?
Are we talking about the ending? So I think what James Knapp's going for is that James White had made a comment about there's 5 different endings to the ending of Mark, which is probably from the discussion that Dr. Wallace has and has repeated on numerous occasions. The Phriologion is one that I'm very familiar with. In fact, I have it right here in front of everybody. This is a facsimile of the Phriologion ending. It's an additional paragraph that inserts this blame game about why the disciples did not believe in the resurrection. And Jerome was familiar with this reading, actually, because he mentioned something like it, whether it was it or from the same family of manuscripts, whatever it may be. In fact, I've worked with at the Smithsonian at the library. I've worked with some of the librarians there on this reading. It's more of an interpolation. I don't know if I would. It is kind of a different ending if you look at it from one viewpoint. I know James Knapp and I probably differ on this. Is it a new ending? In one sense, no, because it supports the long ending. There's no doubt that when you count it for, does the long ending exist in Codex W? Yes. Does the variant that we're talking about as a whole consistent with all of the other variants of the long ending? No, because you have an interpolation there of 2 additional phrasings about this discussion with Jesus and his disciples, making it a unique twist to the ending that is not consistent with the other manuscripts. So when you're looking at the reading, you have to account that there is a variant within this variant. You have some manuscripts, very few, 3 to be precise in Greek, that don't have it, and then 99% have it. Then out of that 99%, there's going to be differences. And the point that Dr. Wallace makes is that some of the manuscripts end earlier in places, but when he's talking about Codex W, like this one, he's referring to the fact that it has a nuanced ending to it that's not consistent with the other 99. And so when you're looking at it in categories, I would categorically separate Codex W from the 99% when it comes to consistency of narrative. When we're talking about, does it support that the long ending existed? Yes, it does support that the long ending existed, because the long ending, it's not just the long ending, it's the long ending and then a longer ending. It's longer than the long ending because it has an interpolation in there, which Jerome was obviously familiar with. He had made mention of something similar in his day. So I know James Knapp and I, like everything that we talk about, he's looking from the complete right and I'm looking from the complete left. And a lot of times we say the same thing, we just don't get on the same page by saying it. And again, like James is an intelligent guy. It's good to have these discussions. I just wish that they would go better than they do half the time. But I don't mind saying that the Codex W, Washington Honest, supports the long ending, but we must categorically pull it from that 99%, look at it in light of it has an interpolation and a textual variant that exceeds the standard long ending reading, as Jerome did. He obviously recognized it and called out the difference. It was enough for him to note. Therefore, I think we should do the same thing. We should note it. It is different because of that weird reading.
Right. Thank you for that, Dr. Stephen Boyce. Now, Retrograd 3 has expressed some encouragement. Really appreciate that, Retrograd 3, for saying that you enjoyed the debate and all that. Thank you for the encouragement. Next one for Dr. Boyce again from Tanner Dickin. He says, would you ever consider making some content on your theology for preservation?
I have. I wrote an article. It's actually co-written with John Beasley. We wrote the back in January. It was December, actually, I believe. It was the end of December and in January, called "The Fallacy of a Perfect Greek Text." You can find it on citylightseattle.com. Hit blog, go through the list. You're gonna have to go back a little ways. It's called "The Fallacy of a Perfect Greek Text." We get into the discussion of how God still preserved His Word within the differences, and that there are textual variances, and that we do not ignore them, and that there are differences between even Byzantine manuscripts. There are no perfectly transmitted side-by-side manuscripts that you can just put up next to each other and say these are 100% consistent at all times, even if it's minor variations. So I haven't written an entire document just on preservation, but we took a good while in one of those sections on how we still believe in the doctrine of preservation without believing that Scrivener's text, as one of our professors said, got it right. We still believe in preservation, and Dr. White still believes in preservation. We just would land differently on what that means and how that is laid out. But if you want to find something immediately that I'm not going to type up tonight, you can go to the blog on City Light Seattle and click "Fallacy of a Perfect Greek Text."
Thank you. Thanks for that. Final question for the night. We don't seem to have any other questions for Jonathan. I'm sorry about that, Jonathan.
It's okay.
Yeah, so final question of the night to Dr. Stephen Boyce, again from James Knapp. He asked, wait just a minute. So it is not a different ending, quote and unquote. It's an interpolation. Where does White get and begin quotation about 5 different endings, close quote?
The interpolation would be different. Again, if you're looking at it from this angle, it's different. If you're looking at it that it supports the existing words in the long ending, it's the same. But it can't be the same if there is a different. And we're not talking about a spelling. We're not talking about one word. We're not even talking about word order or some minor variant. We're talking about a section that is inserted in the middle of the long ending, interrupting the long ending, and then going back to the long ending. You cannot categorically say that they are the same. And by the way, those that work with the manuscript agree with me on this. They would certainly stand here with me if they were standing right here and they'd say, yes, it supports the long ending. So, we can say I'm not answering the question. I am. It supports the long ending's existence because the wording of the long ending is in the Freer Logion manuscript. But it is different. It is a different story narrative ending not because it's telling us a new ending, but that it adds additional information. Therefore, if two things are different, they cannot be the same. They are the same in defense of all of the words of the long ending being in it. You can find all the words of the long ending in this manuscript. You can find it, but you're going to find additional information that's not in the other 99%. So therefore, we cannot call what's different the same. So this is the difference between James Knapp and he doesn't like my answer. And again, all of the people that work with Codex W would say the same thing. We agree on a textual data. If you're going to count the long ending, you should count it as a support passage of the long ending. But it is different, and it is categorically different because there is a major difference, giving a nuance to the ending that is unique to itself and no other manuscript we have, except for that which Jerome knew. Therefore, I'm willing to look at it as different and yet the same. It's a support text of the long ending, but it's different because it has a nuanced interpolation in there. I mean, if that answer doesn't satisfy, I'm sorry. But I do agree that it is both a defense of the long ending, but it's a difference of the long ending at the same time.
All right.
Jonathan, what do you think? I don't know if you have any thoughts. I mean, real quick. What do you think?
In about 30 seconds or so, Jonathan, please go ahead.
Well, I know in my debate with Carrier, he broke it up into 5 basic categories for the reading, but the two main are obviously the shorter, and this is once again a very rare instance, which does support it, does fall into a very unique category because of what it is. So whether you want to categorize it like that, does support, but it is uniquely a strange that, yes, Jerome even picked up on. So if we want to categorize it like that, there's no issue. I think the two main ones that are really about the discussion is where it ends, the shorter reading, and then the longer ending.
Which this one would support the longer ending, but it does have an interpolation that interrupts the narrative with nuance, and then it goes right back into the narrative. There is a distinction. I'm making the distinction. People just don't like the distinction I'm making. Again, hear me. It supports the long ending, but it's not a one-word difference. It's not just a small variant. It's an entire narrative interruption and discussion between Jesus and his disciples, and then it goes back into the narrative. That should be noted. It should be validated as different because of that section, but it supports the long ending reading.
Thank you for that. We just crossed 1 minute after 1 minute past the 90-minute mark, which we originally targeted this review to be only about an hour, 15 minutes. But I really, really appreciate some of the comments that came in. Randall Arthur, thank you for your kind encouragement to me. That's really nice of you. And yeah, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude the review on this channel of the two debates we had between Dr. James White and Dr. Jeff Riddle. There are more reviews to come, I can tell you that. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern in Shamunian, that's Sam Shamoun's channel. We're going to be having, I shouldn't say we, he will be hosting James Knapp. I'm not sure if it's Dr. James Knapp or is it James Knapp? I don't know. Okay, we'll leave it. James Knapp will be on Sam Shamoun's channel tomorrow, Shamunian, at 6 p.m. Eastern tomorrow to, I understand, do a review of the long ending of Mark debate. And on Monday, on the dividing line, I believe that Dr. James White will be doing his own review on the debates that have happened over this weekend. That should be in the afternoon, late afternoon, I believe, Eastern time in the US on Monday. So with that, we close, and just a couple of announcements. That is that we launched our Patreon account. You can find our link to our Patreon account in the description. The funds, of course, will be used to fund our ministry team. We have about 6 people working in our ministry team in Malaysia. The funds will be used to fund them. Some of us are doing our masters, our PhDs, both in Malaysia and abroad. I, of course, am in the US. We have another person in the UK as well. So the funds will go towards funding these things and to advance apologetics ministry in Malaysia, in the Southeast Asian region. And if you're new to the channel, of course, feel free to subscribe and support us and hit the like button if you've enjoyed this. Until next time, I'm Samuel Nason, and on behalf of our panelists, just want to thank both of you guys for coming on, and especially Stephen on his birthday, and Monday will be Jonathan Sheffield's birthday as well. So we're not getting any younger, but thank you guys for the time coming on, even though you have other things to do. So appreciate it. Until next time, guys. Thanks for watching.